Dionysus, Shiva, Krishna. You understand what I'm saying? Krishna, Bacchus, Ha-ur, Raheruka-Hootie, Quetzalcoatl. All this particular one was all the cultures talk about. They talk about the end time Mashiach or Messiah. The Romans made it a historical person of 2,000 years ago, and that is the difference. Now, dealing with this, the Gnostics, in this particular book, the Gnostics, Cliff Tobias actually quotes Mary Shelley. And Mary Shelley, in the book, Man the Monster, chapter 2 of Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, it was written when Blake was 59. Now, Blake is a philosopher also. William Blake is a philosopher also. When Blake was 59, and said, we were of the beginnings of Victor Frankenstein's quest to obtain powers of God. Victor confessed that during the trip to Fanon, a town near the French Alps situated in the shores of Lake Lenon, and he goes into this thing where, as she's quoting what Victor Frankenstein is inspired, or what he is actually trying to attempt, and in her novel appears the word or the human Asclepius. And Asclepius
Imhotep.
is Imhotep, is the Greek form of Imhotep. And it's the Greek, and this is the same God that all physicians swear to with the Hippocratic oath. Imhotep, which is also given a remnant of an ancient Egyptian school or mystery system that in actuality Victor Frankenstein, although a fictional character, is basically a retelling of the same old story of a person that creates his own human. So we're talking about Mary Shelley here. Understanding in these certain occult societies that was springing up all around Europe at the time. And these occult societies that was custodians of different works like your Rosicrucians, who literally had this particular information of the creation of the European left behind by the Moors in Europe at the University of Salamanca and 16 other universities in Europe. They had all of these particular texts. We'll go into some of these texts in a few minutes. But Mary Shelley mentions Asclepius or Imhotep, which is alluding to an ancient arcane school of knowledge. This is very key. This is very key. This is in the book, Cliff Tobias' book, page 133 of his book called The Gnostics, where he mentions that, and it's in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein book. We're just tying this thing in from the fictional as well as the actual evidence based on fact. Now, going back, isn't it amazing that outside of the fiction, or outside, of the theory, that the only hard-nosed evidence that we have is archaeological and anthropological? Which in actuality, we don't have to theorize on this. We actually have the ancient people out of their own mouths giving this particular information. We're going to go through some of this particular stuff. Now, the first thing we need to do, because we're talking about immigrant humans, or hybrid species. The first thing we need to do is I'll give a rendition of this, on what actually went down. Now, in this book, Hermetica, by Walter Scott, it's interesting that this book is not hard to find, but this book is being printed. It's just that if you go to the Rosicrucian Library out in California, they still sell this book. But all of a sudden, I noticed when I started really pumping this book, it became harder and harder to find. If you've noticed, a lot of times certain books that I talked about just mysteriously, it became harder and harder to find. And I'm not necessarily saying that in actuality that I'm ego tripping. Literally, people around the country, books that was plentiful until I started talking about them over and over again, this became harder and harder to find. But nevertheless, we have several texts. But this one I think is the one that is quintessential to what we're talking about here, because in this particular book, on one of the pages, and Lord knows a book this thick with about 545 pages. To close the book and lose the damn page means you gotta labor, because the book doesn't have an index, because it's taken from ancient fragments. And somehow the book got closed on the doggone page, but I will quote it to you, because all I need to do is just show you the book. Walter Scott's Hermetica, where the Egyptians or the Hemmites say that their biggest problem was to create another man. That's what the Egyptian says, documented in this particular book. That our biggest problem was to create another man. Right off the Hermetic text, and now to explain something about the Hermetic text comes from is the Greek word for Tahuti. The wisdom of Tahuti is the oldest science and some of the oldest sciences in the world. That go all the way back, reach all the way back to Atlantis. I know that that's scholastic suicide for most people of the collegiate world, but let's just understand that the Greek sage, that the Greek solid said that it was an Egyptian sage that talked about Atlantis. Now, Dr. Ben said that he did admit that this Greek sage, because I got the same text, talked about this Greek philosopher talked about how an Egyptian sage or a high priest told him about Atlantis. He did admit that. But he just said we just don't have enough evidence on it. But there's tons of evidence on this particular information. It's just that it's found in ancient mythology. And we got to understand that mythology, which we've been duped on this one, mythology is truer than history, because mythology is mutu, divine sayings, or true sayings. Mythology is the way the ancients recorded their history. You see, their history. So there's tons of information on this land before the flood and the land after the flood, antediluvian land after the flood and before the flood. There's tons of information on this particular aspect. You got all of your Vedic texts and literally your Hermetic text. So the Hermetic text also says, quote something out of here. And so to the kinds